Hello, Smart Money Street podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host, and today I'm joined with Doug Hagren. Hey, Doug.
Good. I'll make up some time, Kirk, and not say anything. How is everybody doing today?
Yeah, we had some tech issues here. That's why we're starting late. Tech issues, i.e., my brain. Somehow I scheduled a lunch meeting when back to back with this podcast, so I'm a little late getting started. So all you people watching this live, apologies, but this is still going to be good. So you're not going to want to miss this. So Doug, how's your week?
Rookie move, Kirk. Rookie move.
Rookie move. Yes. How was your week, Doug? We've done 2 in a week, so it's week after Thanksgiving, so it's interesting.
I honestly have nothing, nothing to say, nothing to complain. It's been a busy week. I feel like it's for those out there listening with kids, you get it. We're glorified taxi drivers going from one place to the other. My daughter had a performance last night. I tried to make them all, but I had to skip that because my son is in Scouts and he's grub master for camp out that we're leaving for tonight. So we were shopping, trying to get enough food to feed a bunch of hungry campers for the weekend. I don't know. Let's see what else is going on Tuesday. Tennis. I don't know. It's a blur these days. And, I have a much more exciting stuff to tell you if I can get to the weekend, take a breath and realize what I just went through. But after 5 days of a work day, it's like, get up, run, ship your kids, move on. Everybody here can relate. It just goes back to remind you how of all the talk we have about money, time is the ultimate resource.
100%. It's the only resource you can't make more of. You can always make more money, can't make more time. So, 100%.
Well, and there's no inflation on time. It's the opposite. It just gets shorter.
Actually, I would disagree with you, Doug. As you get older, there is inflation on time because it goes a lot faster when you get older. I don't know. If you think about it, what I find fascinating, right? When you're young, when you're a little kid, time takes forever. Like, oh my God, when's Christmas going to get here? This is taking forever. And now it's just like, oh, is it Christmas again? Like that happened quickly. Like another year gone. And what's interesting is I was thinking about this the other day because it aligns with your cognition of perspective, right? Mm-hmm. If you've only lived 10 years, then every day is meaningful because it's in relation to 10 years. But if you live 50 years, every day is a lot less because proportionally it's a smaller amount. So the way I kind of see it is the longer you live, the faster it goes, only because of your perception of time is spread out in a longer period. And you've got different perspective where kids don't. So
you actually bring up something that aligns with psychology, and this is interesting and totally off topic, but some people might find this fascinating. Our brains, the time seems to go faster as we age because our brains process less information as we get older, leading to fewer distinct memories being created. So each year becomes a smaller portion of our overall life, and that makes it feel more quickly. As we process that information, we have fewer new experiences and our perception gets less vivid. And ultimately, one way to slow it down is to actually bringing up new experiences. So the more busy we make ourselves in learning new experiences, they talk about this when you're aging. Retirees, unfortunately, it used to be years back, you retired, you were dead in 5 years. Some of that was because of living. Some of that was because of social engagement, which we learned with COVID was extremely critical. We are still dealing with a lot of the psychological and mental issues that have led from that isolation. But a perfect analogy of that, Kirk, is if we take a look at video. If I did video processing as I almost majored in college, and film was 24 frames per second. And then when we went to video, digital was 30 frames per second. If you go back to the days of hand cranked movie, film back from the early days of the 1920s, everybody knows this, right? You watch an old film and everybody's like, zip it now. It's because, and it's the exact same thing as the perception. The film was filmed at much lower than 24 frames per second. That meant you were getting less snapshots. And then as you take that film now and run it at the current 24 to 30 frame per second, everything runs faster. And that's exactly what's going on with our minds. We are now, because when we were processing as little kids, basically 80 frames a second of data, everything, now we bring it into our memory and everything's slower. But now that we are processing 10 frames per second of new experiences, now we bring that into our perspective and everything seems faster. So if you want to be able, and this is, I think, a great correlation to our conversations, because what are we really talking about here, right? We're not just talking about the stock. Who cares? Stock market goes up, stock market goes down. The thing that people, why people care about money, why people care about wealth, is not having paper for the sake of paper. We have talked about this before. I mean, 1930s, they were late 20s, 30s, they were burning German marks to stay warm. Money's, again, this gets us on a conversation of Bitcoin, right? It's just paper, burn it, doesn't matter. It's worthless. But the reality is we fight and work so hard for money to be able to utilize that money to translate to the things that matter to us. And what happens is the things that matter to us the most are probably the most vivid in our life when we have the least amount of time to appreciate it. And some ways that when we were the most blurred just doing task management in our day-to-day jobs, by the time you get to the point in which you can maybe and hopefully pull back from that to where you get to enjoy life and you're not consumed by running people, the tasks of running things here and there, or sitting in meetings in corporate offices all day and not really learning anything new. It's a time in which a lot of people stop. They're tired. They actually stop giving themselves the opportunity to experience this. I mean, you see this in a lot of the older generation. It's like, I don't want to travel anymore. I just sit around my house. I don't want to go places. Like when we're young, we're like, what more can we do? Let's go. And unfortunately, the counter, you could argue that it's the opposite of that you should now at that time take the most focus you have probably in the last 20 to 30 years to try to create new experiences. This actually comes into something I've talked about in other podcasts with you, presentations, the retirement mindscape. Ken Dykewald, PhD, psychology, did this in collaboration with one of the major broker dealers to look at the retirement mindscape, which was the five stages that they discovered that people go through in retirement. And this basically, it is the third stage. So the first stage is the years before, and I'm forgetting the titles right now. The first stage, years before, it's dreaming of retirement someday. And it's, and planning for it. Then you get to the 5 years before retirement, where people get an increased amount of anxiety and worry. Have I done enough? And now being, a late, a Gen Xer on the cusp of that, I'm experiencing that every day. I think it, but I hear it from my wife, I hear it from her friends, like, that anxiety started to creep up. Have we done enough? Then you get into the first year, you pull that trigger, bam, it's exciting. And that first year is absolutely euphoric. I'm retired. I don't have to go into the job. I can work. I can play. I can do all this. I can play more golf. It's also the number one time that most retirees blow their retirement because, again, you just added 40 hours a week more that you can spend and consume, because that's how we fill our times. And as things have gotten more expensive with inflation, that has meant we're blowing more of that. And if you're a golfer, you really need to do good financial planning, because Nationwide did a study on this years ago. I mean, it's expensive. It's an expensive hobby. Hockey, I don't know, too many 60-year-olds are still playing hockey, but again, expensive hobby. If you have expensive hobbies, you're going to spend more of those now that you have the time. But then the fifth stage came in, or the fourth stage came in, and that was about a year after retirement. And that's when worry set back in. Have I spent too much? Will I have enough? Boredom starts to set in. Like I play golf 5-7 days a week, and I just need something different. This is the stage in which they found 5 different types of retirees. And one of those, what they call the empowered, I'm messing these up, the empowered creator, but it's basically the time in which a lot of, was one of the most likely times in which people started a second career, started a new business. You basically had 5 different personalities there. The last stage is the one in which predates death, unfortunately. It's starting to get about 10 to 15 years out of retirement. Everything's slowing down. Nothing. The only thing that really matters now, as much as anything, is health and family. This is the point in which your aunt or your grandparents started saying, I always wanted you to have this table or this vase or this glass, and they start to hand things out because to them, that is really the thing that matters. It's that fourth stage, I think, that's critical. And you need to plan that in the second, in the first, second, and third stages so that you can be able to create opportunities to reward yourself with new experiences and continue to live this life that you have worked so hard to. So,
Yeah, no, that's great perspective, Doug. Or you could take the easy route if you really want new experiences. Get Alzheimer's. You have new experiences every single day.
yes, or and I've learned, you want to find out how much of the country is living in at least early stage Alzheimer's or dementia. Get on social media, because I was just sitting watching this morning. It was so funny. The sister of a defensive coordinator for a major college football team was sitting there defending that her brother just at the DC just came in with like the best defensive stats in the country. And she's like, yeah, quote, fire him, right? And of course, all of these fans are like, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody ever wanted your brother fired. We're talking about these other coaches. You're just getting on there and being like, emotional on social media. Of course, she fired back with like 57 images of people like 6 months ago saying, fire her brother, fire her brother, fire her brother. Very evident that nothing shows that we all have early stage Alzheimer's until we get into arguing about sports. Just
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading about the concept of the Misogi, I think is what it's
Yeah,
called.
I've heard of that.
And a friend of mine kind of introduced me to the this thing called the Big Ass Calendar, and basically it just takes a whole year. So I do this stuff at the year
I've seen
end.
this
So
calendar. Yep, I know
yeah,
people using it.
I'll kind of walk through this because I've been doing this pretty much for years. At the end of the year, I'll work through like basically do a whole process. I call it kind of like best year ever process, and it's basically like reflection on the prior year, thinking about what was great, what didn't do well, and just kind of like writing it all down and reflecting, and then thinking about what do I want to do next year. Um, what do I need to change? What are all the things that need to happen? So really just kind of reflecting on the past year and then the future year. And one of the things, because I got the Big Ass Calendar this year because I want to try it out. And one of the things I talk about is this concept of the Misogi, which is having like a big thing you do, a big thing to accomplish throughout the year. And so if you kind of just cruise through life and you don't think about what you're doing and you just kind of like, oh, it'd be nice to go on a vacation and you haven't put any thought into it. But if you actually like plan things out and say, what's the one big thing I would love to do? Or if you're so inclined, and most people aren't, but if you're so inclined, you put together a bucket list. And, if you're 50 years old and you got a bucket list, you're not going to do it all when you're 70 because there's things you just can't do. So why not create the bucket list now when you're younger and then spend the rest of your life checking things off? Right. So maybe this year, I've always wanted to go to Argentina. So this year, like, all right, let's plan a trip to Argentina, or, I've always wanted to run a marathon or, whatever it might be. But you come up with something that's challenging and interesting and something you've always wanted to do, and then plan your year around it. So if you want to run a marathon, it's like, well, what do I have to do to run a marathon? Well, I have to go train. I have to figure out how to train. I have to get the equipment. I have to, carve out time, like all these different things. Like I remember when I ran, I don't really cycle much, but I did the Pan Mass Challenge when I was younger. It's basically 200 miles over 2 days. And when you don't train, it's a little challenging. Even when you do train, it's still challenging. But
Just a slight bit. No,
yeah,
you're not recommending this to couch potatoes.
no, definitely not. But when I was younger, I was more in shape, so I didn't have to train so hard. But still, like there were people who were like legit cyclers, and they just blew everybody away.
I thought you
But
were
it's
going to
more
say
of a
legit
ride,
psychos, Kirk. Sorry.
right? But it's more of a ride, right? It was to raise money and all that. But I used to enjoy doing it because it was challenging, and it was something that first time I did it, I planned it out. I'm like, all right, I need to, and this is really at the early stage of the internet, so there wasn't a lot of resources there like there are now. on how to train, but it was like, all right, how am I going to train? All right, I'm going to try to cycle like 100 miles. I'm going to start with like 100 miles over a week, right? And then you keep doing these different things, and by the time I was ready, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to do this. But I had to plan that out, right? I had to say, all right, I need to commit 2 hours a day or whatever it is to training in order to not look stupid, not to hurt myself or whatever it was. And so as we kind of do these big projects, like let's say, oh, I want to take a trip to Argentina, use that example. Well, maybe you need to save some money, right? Maybe it's like, all right, I'm going to do this in Q4. I need to save an extra $2,000 this year. So what do I need to do? So walking through that process of planning around this, you basically take the end goal and you start working backwards. And I'm gonna give everybody kind of a quick hint here. So if you ever, Doug, you ever remember the kid mazes? You know, you get your kid like a book full of mazes, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
you take a pencil and you put way through. All right, you know
Yeah.
the secret to those?
I don't.
Oh God, you're not a puzzler. The secret is you start at the end and work backwards. So
Okay.
all
Okay.
of these mazes are intricately designed to stymie somebody starting from the start. But
Mm-hmm.
if you start from the end, it's actually really easy because it's not designed to stymie you at all. It's actually really clear if you start at the end, and it's like, oh, there's no mistakes. I just have to go straight. But if you start at the beginning, they've got all these paths. You're supposed to get lost. Anyway, so when you're doing planning, one of the best things you could do is the same. Start with the end in mind and start working backwards. All right, I need to take a trip to Argentina. Okay, what do I need to take a trip? Well, I need these things. All right, I need to get a plane trip. You know, I need to get a plane ticket. I need to save money. I need to get a vaccine or a shot or whatever's required so I don't start throwing up from the water. Like all of this stuff you have to plan around. But you start with the end in mind, you start working backwards, and you start checking off all the pieces and say, all right, am I good? All right, I'm great, and now you can go and you can have a good time, right? That's a good methodology for planning for anything. Now, if you bring it into the financial realm, which obviously there's a segue here, I'm trying to segue into financial stuff. You segue that into financial planning. It's the same thing. What do I want to do in retirement? You don't start with I want $1 million because you don't want $1 million. You want what $1 million will give you because nobody needs $1 million. It's just paper, right? It's just toilet paper if you really were so inclined, or if you lived in Weimar, Germany, or Zimbabwe. You know, it's basically people use it for toilet paper. But realistically, what you don't need is money. You need the stuff that money gives you. So if you want to retire and take a trip to Argentina, then plan for that, right? Start at the end, work backwards. If you say, I want to do these 20 things for the rest of my life, you figure out the 20 things. You say, all right, what's the most important thing to get done this year? All right, I need to take this trip. Okay, so then you plan the trip. What do I want to do next year? You start thinking out your life in this way, it actually becomes a lot more clear. So when we do our financial planning with people, we start with the end in mind, like what's your bucket list? We work backwards. We start checking them off, making sure that you actually get them all done because you can. But if you start when you're 70, you're not going to be able to get them all done. It'd just be really, really challenging. But if you start when you're 50, it's a lot easier. So if you're looking at your planning and financials, you say, all right, what do I need at retirement? Well, if you listen to the cuckoos that are writing blog posts and saying, oh, you need $1 million. Well, this year you need 10 million. No, you don't. You don't need that. Don't stress yourself out over that. What you need to do is figure out what you want to do and then start working backwards and seeing how much money you actually need. It's actually going to be a lot less than you think.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you it is always a lot less than you think. It doesn't mean you ignore that and stop saving. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that whatever it is, you're going to be pleasantly surprised because most people are convinced, and Wall Street's good at this. Oh, you need $10 bazillion to retire, the way you want. No, you don't. Like, there are plenty of people who don't have any money and they retire just fine. So, but it depends on your lifestyle. It depends what you want. So, anyway, the point being is if you want a simple hack, start with the end in mind, start working backwards. It's a lot easier to do your planning than if you're starting and you're like, I don't know where to go. How much do I save? Blah, blah, blah. No, it's because you don't know where you're going. So figure out where you're going first and then work backwards. Your planning will be much, much easier.
I think you keyed on a really important point there, Kirk, because I actually looked at some research recently. Um, everybody, so basically, this is really important for people to understand. There's four important questions that you need to think about when you start to when you start to figure out how much money you're going to need. That is, and that of course you guys start with the end in mind. Now, this is much easier, like you said, on a book maze in a book or looking at retirement than it is trying to get into a corn maze, because you can't get to the end. You have to get there from the start. So it's obviously different when we're looking at two-dimensional world here. But if you figure out what you want to do and you figure out what it's going to be, you can begin to look back at costs. And yes, okay, inflation could be higher, inflation could be lower. There's 6 major risks you have to think about. There's inflation, there's taxes, there's market volatility, there is going to be longevity, which is actually the worst, because longevity is a compilation of all, it will increase the chances of all of the above. You're going to have higher taxes, higher inflation, more market volatility. The longer you have longevity, so this is critical, not running out of money. Then it's going to be things like liquidity, like access to capital. When you start to begin to look at that, you then can think about, all right, how do I get there? Now, most people think of getting there through one means, and that is I need to either save more, which is extremely, the data's out there, extremely difficult for most people to save more, right? Yes, you can cut out more things in your budget. You could certainly decide not to ever have a coffee and literally live like a miser. But the majority of things in our lives, it is certainly the hardest part, both emotionally and financially, for people to go back and make an adjustment to. So it's the last thing you really try to look at. But the first thing most people look at is, I need to get more rate of return. In order to get more rate of return, it means you try to go out there and take a more aggressive stance in your investing, and that leads to taking on an exceptional and exponential amount of increasing risk in order to do it. And we're seeing that right now. Matter of fact, I've got a data I just posted, Kirk, to you, that was talking about the amount of money, or I'm sorry, the amount of new flows that are going in the stock market. I'm going to come back to what I was talking about there, but basically we are looking at just an incredibly high amount. Sorry, I'm trying to actually find it here. And this one thing I don't do a good job of is multitasking, looking while I'm trying to talk. But I'll come back to that. But basically, we're trying. They try to take more rate of return. It's like I got to get more rate. The only reason you need to get more rate of return is you have a fear, an embedded fear that you're not going to have enough money, and the only way you're going to be able to overcome that is to actually put a greater amount of money into your account every year that you're not controlling from your investments. It's not that you can't do it, but of course, this is incredibly out of your control. Like, you don't control rates of return. It is something that no matter what you do, it is going to be something that can, go up higher, and you can certainly influence it by having a more aggressive allocation, but it can also cause you to lose what you have. So the first question you have to figure out is, what rate, if that was what you were going to do, what rate of return are you going to actually need in order to achieve the growth necessary to have the amount of funds to be able to cover those things that you said you want? And the reality of that is, for most people, it's an eye-opener, because, if you're lucky enough that you've done enough, saved enough, you look at it and say, oh, great, it says I only need a 3% rate of return. Well, then the question to you is, why do you have your money sitting there 100% in the S&P 500 when you only need a 3% rate of return? Why are you taking all that risk? And that's a psychological behavioral finance question, because people will still sit there, but they'll have a struggle taking less risk and getting a lower rate of return because they're just programmed to need it. But this is what can cause implosion of the wealth that you've already built up and you already have enough for. Now, for a lot of people, it's the other side. You look at it and you say, all right, it says here you're going to need a 18% rate of return every year, or a 25% rate of return every year now, to have enough money to do what you want. Guess what? That's impossible to achieve. It's if you're lucky. So now it's important to know this, because if this is all you're relying on, it's not going to happen. So now you got to look at adjusting other things. And what are the other things? Well, I just said you could try to save more. Well, retirement savings is absolutely anemic for most of America. They're woefully haven't saved enough for what they want. Again, some of that is subjective by what you're being told on the blogs, because the next piece comes into, okay, well, how could you work longer? What if you continue to do what you're doing? Same rate of return, same savings, you just work a little bit longer. Now, obviously, that's somewhat out of your control too, because there's going to be times in which you're going to be told you're not allowed to work anymore. Maybe the employer says your job is up, or maybe your health doesn't allow you to be able to work any longer. So it's certainly something you can influence, but it's not necessarily something that you can control. And the last piece then comes down to the four questions. It comes down to, all right, how much you can spend. And this is the part that the research found was very interesting, is it said that, as you said, all these things say you've got to have all this more money, more money, more money. And the reality is, as you said, plenty of people are making it that don't have what those are told. And that's because the one thing that most planning has never taken into consideration effectively is human nature. And human nature says, and has shown, that people will adjust to their means. They will make it work. And so therefore, it's important to say, well, okay, if you don't have that, how much could you spend per month? And that is something that we have seen time and time again through research, that people will adjust. So a lot of these generic models out there, they do a really, really poor job of taking into the consideration the human psychology that comes into our ability to adjust to our environment.
Did you miss your opportunity to get PPP money during COVID? Are you waiting for our president to forgive your student loans? Are you excited about helicopter money? Me too. If you want free money, look no further. I'm giving away free money this week on our show. All I ask is 5 or 10 minutes of your time. I'm so excited to give you free money, I can hardly contain myself. Take advantage of me and my excitement to get your free money. Go to www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. Follow the instructions today and get your free money. Yeah, no, that's great, Doug. I appreciate that. Let's dive into some of the pieces here, because just as you were going through this, there's some things I wanted to touch on. Obviously, there's some things I saw throughout the week that I thought were kind of interesting. Here's one of them, and for whatever reason, I can't get this stupid thing to stop showing. There's a bubble in the middle of this that I can't get to go away. Thank you. Where is it? Slack. Anyway, I'm just going to share this. We'll see. We'll just deal with this. All right. So here is something I saw I thought was pretty interesting, and this is basically child mortality for history, like going back like thousands of years. It is basically the same, right? It was basically 50% or 49% according to these people. Oh crap! There we go. So it was about 50% up until it looks like somewhere around the early 1900s, and then started to decline sharply, and went. I think it was 48% over 21 societies over like thousands of years, right? So it was 49% for hunter gatherer societies, and then 48% over like 21 societies, including Mexico and Rome and Egypt and Peru and Japan, like, just statistical numbers. And then, in the early 1900s, started to drop. In 1950, it was 27 for global. And then 2020 was at 4.3. And then if you look at certain countries, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Japan, Slovenia, have the lowest mortalities of 0.3%. So I just thought it was a really interesting stat, and I just wanted to bring it up because we all look at statistics, and it's just interesting to see. I'm not sure how they determine it's 49 or 48% over thousands of years. That to me seems like there's probably a lot of data that we don't have, that they're just guessing. But still, it's kind of interesting just to see like where technologies come, and cleanliness, and like simple things to keep obviously to keep kids alive. Also, it's funny. I had a friend of mine send me some videos because he's very into Bitcoin, and I was, there's this company, MicroStrategies, which Michael Saylor, he's very pro Bitcoin, as you all know, and I was listening to an interview with him, and it was just fascinating to hear how his company is addressing Bitcoin, because he's got some weird and interesting strategy, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes, because I think you should, if you're all at all interested, it's a really interesting perspective on how he perceives not just Bitcoin, but how he uses it and why his companies started doing that in the middle of COVID, why they started buying it and levering it up with bonds and convertible bonds and equity and basically issuing debt to go buy Bitcoin. And on the surface, it seems like a Ponzi scheme, in my opinion. But when you hear why he's doing it and how he's doing it, you're like, okay, that actually makes more sense. And so I'm going to put it in the show notes because the perspective is interesting, and the reason why I want people to understand it. And I'll see if I can get him on the show. I mean, he's very hard to get in the show, but I'll see if I can get him on the show because um, what I find interesting is we're heading into this new paradigm with technology, with human history. I mean, things are going to change so rapidly with AI and digital currency. And I know the Trump administration is very pro crypto, and the people that they're appointing are very pro crypto, which, of course, we've been fooled before. The last SEC chairman was also pro crypto until he got in there, and all of a sudden he was anti crypto. So we'll see. Um, Optimistic, but being realistic. So, but if you look at some of these things, there's some interesting things here, which I thought was interesting. I keep saying that, so apologies. So here's one. So here's the amount of um, Bitcoin holders, top holders. So spot ETFs are the biggest holders by a little bit of Bitcoin.
In a
Uh,
very short period of time.
well, yeah, we're talking about what, 15 years, something like that. Then you've got Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody knows who that is, has 1.1 million Bitcoin. Binance, there's about 600,000 on their platform. MicroStrategies has 400,000. The U.S. government has shy of 200,000 Bitcoin. Chinese government has 4,000 less than the U.S. government. Then you've got a bunch of other Binfinex, Kraken, Block One, Robinhood that also have them on their platform. But I just found this fascinating because I've never stopped to think about who are the top holders. The fact that Chinese government's the top holder is really interesting. And the fact the U.S. government, I think it's probably because they they confiscated it through, through criminal action. They held on to it. We'll see. I know that people have proposed the U.S. government have it as a reserve asset. We'll see if that makes sense or not. I'm not convinced one way or the other. But I do think it's important to stop and think. We all have our preconceived notions about what's right and wrong. My preconceived notions was the way that MicroStrategies was being explained was a Ponzi scheme, and it still might be. I don't know. I haven't dove into it, but to me, it smelled like that. And I've been around the block enough to know that if something smells like a duck, sounds like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. It doesn't mean it is, and I'm not chastising the company because I haven't given it the diligence that it deserves, but I am going to start looking into it because I am kind of fascinated after watching this video of like, okay, I get his perspective. I get why he's doing it. All of that makes sense. It all seems rational to a fault almost. Because if you think about like why Elon Musk was the first one, he bought Bitcoin with the treasury for Tesla, I believe, years ago. And I thought that was an interesting marketing ploy, but no one's really taken it seriously. However, Microsoft has on they're putting a vote for shareholders, and I think there's three other companies that are doing this as well, where they have it to a vote to shareholders. Should we hold Bitcoin as a treasury asset? Which I give them an A plus for offering that for even a vote. Now, of course, who are the shareholders? It's big mutual funds, big ETF companies. So you pretty much have the big boys making the decision. But I appreciate the fact that they are at least putting it out there. So one vote was that they basically replicate what MicroStrategy is doing, which I don't think they should do. The other one is that they should own it on their treasury. Well, I do think that's a reasonable idea. If Bitcoin's growing at 60% a year on average, good and very bad years, but let's say 60%, or the vol is 60%. And then, you've got a company like Microsoft's growing at like 25, 35%. Well, obviously, it would grow quicker with an asset like Bitcoin. Now, I'm not suggesting they do this. Like, I'm just talking like hypothetical thought experiment here. So, if you think about like, if you have a stagnant company that's not growing, and you can add an asset that's growing 60%, why wouldn't you do that? right? Any company would do this. So if I run a company, let's say $100 million company, and my growth is stagnating, it's like 1%, 2% a year. I'm not growing. I'm not shrinking, but I'm not growing. Well, there's of course a risk because something bad could happen. Now I start shrinking. So what would you do? Well, one option is to acquire a company. You could go out and acquire a company that's growing faster, take that growth and impute it on what you're doing, and all of a sudden now you're growing at 20% because you've taken their company, added to yours, and now your 0% growth is added to a 40%. Let's say it's averaging at 20. Well, now it's a winner. That's why a lot of companies will grow through M&A because either they're at the end of their rope for organic growth or they're trying to grow quicker or something else. So one way to do that is through M&A. A lot of companies do it. A lot of companies do it poorly. Let me just add, most acquisitions are poorly done and they do not help the company. So if you think acquisitions are good, think again. Historically, the numbers are pretty indicative of the fact that it's a really bad idea for most companies. Theoretically, it's a good idea, but in practice, it doesn't work well. Now, he could also sell his company, take all that money and go right off in the sunset. Or what he's decided to do is basically lever up the company with Bitcoin that's growing quicker, which, if you think about it, it's not the case. Bitcoin is not a company. But if it's growing at 60% and you compare that to a company that's growing at 20, well, it's kind of the same thing as buying a company because the growth rate is similar to what you'd want in a company, but it's not an actual company. It's just a digital asset. So all of that to say, it's a really interesting perspective on how to look at crypto or Bitcoin specifically, but crypto and how you could use it on your balance sheet as a company for both leverage. Like I think what they're doing is they're basically saying, all right, we want to borrow $100 million and we're going to put that 100 million into Bitcoin. Would you lend us money to do that? Well, sure, we'd do that if I had the risk appetite and I knew your balance sheet was solid. Sure, I'd do that. As an investor, I'd say, yeah, but I want a piece. I'm going to give you 3%. You're going to make 60. No, I want a piece. So they put together convertible bonds, which means you pay basically 0%, and over a certain price you start to make profit. Well, as a convertible bondholder, that's very valuable. Why wouldn't I do that? And I get better return there than I would somewhere else. So all this is to say that it's a really interesting perspective. We're going to come back to it. We got to cut it off because it's at the hour. I realized we went really quick because I showed up late. But Doug, take us home really quick, and we'll see everyone next week.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. I think we got a lot of good stuff to talk about that we didn't get into today. But I mean, from a key perspective, I think I want to really kind of tee off on that psychological aspect of it. The behavioral finance component of it is critical in all the decisions you make. Think of the end game. And obviously, those of you who have listened to me talk many, many times on the show, I have said that one of the biggest end games you want to be able to focus on if you have kids is going to be making sure that they are set up for an extraordinary future. What does that extraordinary future mean? It means that they're going to be able to stand on their 2 feet, have a great career, be able to be self-sufficient. They're not going to circle and boomerang back to your house. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that is going to mean having the right education. Now, whatever that education is, going to trade school, fine. Maybe it's getting the education to get on work, or it's going to college. Either way, the problem is we've got trillions of dollars where families and kids have taken on extraordinary amounts of debt and leverage in order to try to be able to make that happen. And it really does put a real stressor on the American dream. Listen, there's a misconception in this business. This business has spent and misconception of parents that is all about getting down the cost of college. There is no denying that is a piece of it. Where can you find scholarships? Where can you find discounts? What can you do to be able to be in a position in which the college is going to be great academically, financially, and socially? But the bigger thing is, and this is where our industry and most people you talk to don't do a woeful job, is how to pay for college. And that can also translate to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth transfer, unknowingly or unnecessarily. Most planners, 95% of them, are not addressing housing and college in a way that can really change and transform your ability to have that successful retirement you're looking for. And if that's important to you, doing nothing is not going to be a plan. Hope is not a plan. And ultimately, if you're talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of wealth, that's transformative if we look at how much families have really saved. So if that matters to you, and again, maybe it doesn't, you might want to start looking at that today. Go to our website, mergentcollegeadvisors.com, MERGENT, collegeadvisors.com. Start getting them some information. Check out our free scholarship estimator report. Find out how much college is going to cost for you. And then maybe let's have a chat to figure out where you, even if you're mass affluent and you've got a good savings, you're probably paying out of after tax dollars. Those taxes can be crushing in total cost. Even those that can afford college can save tremendous amounts of money through good planning.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, Doug. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your wisdom with us. We'll have you on again next week. We'll get into some of the cool topics that we had on the docket we didn't get to today. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.